start with a super quick unboxing here. It's a pretty large box for a 13-inch notebook, but it has a lot of padding in there, so that's nice. When you lift the lid, the notebook is sitting there, and underneath is some pamphlets and some quick start guides. The top of the notebook is plastic and has a little Alienware jewel which lights up. I'll get into that later. If I had to draw a comparison, the materials feel very Dell Inspiron. Fingerprints don't show at all on the surface. It's like a thick gray plastic that has a bit of a metallic sheen to it, but it doesn't feel like a very premium material. On the bottom of the notebook there are 4 rubber feet. They're actually made out of a very hard rubber, so it's not very grippy, but their main purpose is to raise the notebook off the table so that the intake vents here can suck air in. And if you remove these 2 screws here, you can pop off the lid and upgrade your RAM as well as your hard drive. So the model here has a 1TB hard drive. You really want to pop this thing out and replace it with an SSD. Now, something I noticed before I replaced it, this hard drive was making clicking noises every once in a while, but I didn't have it in there for very long before I switched it to an MX100. So this model here has a Core i7-5500U, which is a dual-core 3 GHz chip, 16 gigs of RAM, a 1080p IPS panel, a GTX 960 with 2 gigs of RAM, and the stock drive is a 1TB 5400 RPM piece of crap that you probably want to replace right away. And this is priced at $1,500 from Dell. I noticed there was quite a bit of flex on the screen, but even though it flexes so much, I still feel like it's relatively well made. There isn't any play on the hinge or anything, it's just that the materials they've chosen are flexible. Now the chassis and the keyboard do not flex very much, but I think it's more due to the sheer thickness of this machine rather than build quality. This is a surprisingly thick notebook. Okay, so on the right side of the notebook you have your right speaker, 2 USB ports, and an Ethernet jack. And on the left side of the notebook you have your AC adapter hole, a lock slot, another USB 3, separate microphone and headphone jacks, and lastly your left speaker. These speakers are pretty big, and that case is also really thick. This machine comes in at almost 28mm, which is over an inch. That's a really thick notebook for 2015. There is no SD slot, so I understand this is a gamer notebook, but just keep it in mind if you're interested in this thing. Now on the back of the notebook you have your exhaust, and you have a port for the Alienware graphics amplifier, mini display port, HDMI port, and another exhaust. And in case you want to see it up close, this is the corner of the notebook where they've kind of angled it off. It's a design feature that's unique to Alienware, and I think it looks kind of cool. On the inside, the material is actually a soft touch rubber. It shows fingerprints like crazy, but it's actually really nice to touch. Now I can't tell how the long-term durability of this material will be, just because your palm will be rubbing on it all the time. But when this thing is new, it feels really nice. Instead of chiclet keys, this thing looks like one of those old school notebook keyboards. It feels good, types well, and the directional keys are in a great position. I think most gamers will really like this. Now the trackpad is a completely different story. The buttons feel fine, they click reasonably well, but tracking is particularly bad. It skips around, sometimes it doesn't pick up movements, and honestly I'm getting so tired of seeing these really cruddy trackpads with otherwise great hardware. I really wish companies would spend more time on trackpads. So Alienware computers can light up. They have some nice LED systems in them that you can configure extensively with software. So you can control different zones of the keyboard and adjust the Alienware logo as well as the Alien Face logo. The software is really intuitive, and the colored lighting is much brighter than other notebooks I've seen like the HP Omen. You can also adjust the LEDs of the front cover. As far as I could tell, the Alien Face and the 2 diagonal lines sadly have to be the same color. I know, I wanted to change it as well. The webcam supposedly does 1080p stills, but for video use it feels like 720p. The screen I'm reviewing is a 1080p non-touch screen. They do make a Quad HD touchscreen, but it's about $200 more. It's a matte screen, so the reflections aren't super bad, and the viewing angles are pretty good. Dell advertises it at 350 nits, and it does look pretty bright. Now visually, color accuracy seemed pretty good, but I ran a spider on it and it's coming in at 75% for Adobe RGB, which is kind of par for the course with these kind of notebooks. It's not ideal for a colorist, but just for regular use in gaming it's no problem. The AC adapter is 130 watts. It's big, it's heavy, and it's just the way it is with these gaming notebooks. And this guy has that classic Dell rubber strap to tie everything up when you travel. And the AC adapter tip has this nice blue ring light, but sadly it doesn't change colors or anything when you plug it in. It's just always on blue. Okay, speakers. This thing has one of the loudest speakers I've ever heard on a notebook. They can easily break 80 decibels. They're big because the case is so thick, but they don't sound particularly good. Alright, let's talk about fan noise. When this thing is idle, it's coming in about 20 decibels. Under medium load, it kicks into about 25-26 decibels. It's definitely audible, but it's still relatively quiet. Now when you're running benchmarks and this thing's going full tilt, It's still not even that loud, it only comes at around 30 decibels. I mean, it's very obvious that the fan is running, but it's a lot quieter than most notebooks I've used at full load. And just for kicks, here's some thermal imaging. The heat is spread across the whole keyboard. It's not super hot or anything, it's just a very evenly spread out heat. Now, this thing is a gaming notebook, so let's talk about some games. Even though this is a Broadwell i7, it only has 2 cores, so my expectations for this thing were not super high. Dota 2, League, and Heroes of the Storm all run above 60 frames per second at high settings, so I was very surprised. If you put them to very high or ultra settings, you start to drop down. Depending on the game, you'll get about 40, maybe 50 frames per second. Now, the previous generation of this notebook was running a GT860M. Now, I did a little research, and it turns out that the previous 860M was also a Maxwell architecture chip. So the 960M in this notebook is just a slightly faster clocked version of the same chip that was in the previous generation. So if you have the previous Alienware with an 860M, it's not worth the money to upgrade it. And for the very first time I actually played BioShock Infinite. I'd heard really good things about this game and it didn't disappoint. I played this thing until the batteries ran out and it corrupted my save, so I'm pretty sad. But the frame rates are always around 55-60 frames per second, which is really surprising for a 2-core CPU.